Friends and viewer, Mark Twain, again Mark Twain, and today I am going to tell you about one of his famous short story. The name of this short story is the the celebrated jumping frog. The name of this is The Celebrated Jumping Frog by Mark Twain. So the story of this short story begins as the narrator begins the story by explaining that a friend of his back east has asked him to check in on an acquaintance, Rev. Leonidas W. Smiley, to do so. The narrator seek out an older man named Simon Wheeler, and the rest of the story is the result of that visit. The narrator notes that he suspects Leonidas W. Smiley doesn't really exist. He speculates that his friend knows the name will remind Wheeler of a man named Jim Smiley, and that Wheeler will launch into a long story about him. That is exactly what happens. The narrator finds Simon Wheeler sleeping by the stove in a tavern in an Angel's Camp, a mining town, after waking and greeting Wheeler. The narrator asks him about Leonidas. Wheeler then sits the narrator down in the corner of the tavern and begins to speak. The narrator notes that during the entire account which follows, Wheeler hardly shows any emotions and never wavers from a singular, gentle and monotonous tone of voice. According to the narrator, Wheeler doesn't find anything funny whatsoever about the story he tells, and in fact takes the matter extremely seriously and regards the man in this story as a hero. The narrator finds this absurd, but he does not interrupt Wheeler throughout his narrator. Wheeler begins by describing a man named Jim Smiley who came to Angel's Camp in the winter of 1849 or spring of 1850. The interesting thing about Jim Smiley is that he would make a bet with anybody about anything. If a person was reluctant to take the bet, Smiley would switch sides just to entice them. Smiley loved to bet because he was very lucky and would almost always win. He especially loved to bet on animals, including horse races, dog, cat, and even chicken fight. But he would bet on unconventional and unusual thing too. He might bet on which bird among two would be the first to fly off a wire and which speaker at the town meeting was best at speaking. He would bet on where a random saddlebuck was going and how long it would take for it to get there and then follow the buck to Mexico, so he would find out. One time Person Walker's wife was sick and it was expected she may die, and when she showed improvement and it looked like she may live, Jim Smiley told Walker had bet that she'd die anyway. To feed his gambling habit, Jim Smiley kept a series of animals that he would use to place bets. One of these was a sickly mare with a variety of ailments. Despite looking like a wreck and startling each other race, slowly the mare would get a burst of energy at the end of a race and almost always come out the winner. If barely another was a dog that Smiley named Andrew Jackson, who did nothing but sit around looking lazy. However, whenever Smiley put him up to fight and bet on him, Andrew Jackson would suddenly get tough and mean. He would even let the other dog bully him and beat him up, so the bet against him. Then suddenly Andrew Jackson would grab the other dog hind leg with his jaw and clamp down and never let go. and he would win the fight. Smelly never lost a bit on the Andrew Jackson until he fight a dog without any hind legs. When it was time to clamp down on the other dog's leg, Andrew Jackson discovered that he didn't have any and gave up the fight. So the old dog looked at him, Jim Smelly, with a disappointment on his face as he were heartbroken, and then limped away, laid down and died. Next, Jim Smelly caught a frog. Now the story comes on frog. Caught a frog and decided to train it. For 3 months, all Smelly did was teach the frog to jump. He taught the frog to jump so high he would do 1 or 2 somersaults in the air and land back on his feet. Smelly said that the frog only needed education to be able to do anything. He named the frog Don Webster, so good at catching flies that Smelly only need to say, "Flies, Don, flies." And the frog would leap up, grab a fly off the counter with his tongue and land back on his feet on the floor again, looking modest. Daniel Webster especially was jumping from a sitting position, and he could go higher than any frog there ever was. Jim Smelly was proud of his frog and bet on him whenever he could. People who had traveled everywhere said Don Webster was the best jumping frog they had ever seen. One day, Jim Smelly was sitting in the camp with a small lattice box containing Don Webster when a stranger walked up and asked him what was inside. Smelly told the stranger it was a frog. The stranger examined the frog in the box and asked what it was good for. Smelly responded that the frog could out-jump any frog in the cavalry's county and that he would bet the stranger. The stranger said he didn't see anything special about the frog, and he didn't have a frog himself, but would take the bet if he did. Smelly said he would go and get a frog from the stranger. So the stranger agreed to bet. Smelly handed the box to the stranger and went down to the swamp to catch a frog. While Smelly was away, the stranger picked up Daniel Webster, opened his mouth and filled his body with quail shot. Jim Smelly returned with the frog from the swamp and put the two side by side, ready for the jumping contest. Smelly then counted to 3 and 2, and men touched their respective frogs from behind to urge them to jump. The new frog jumped forward. Daniel Webster, however, only gave a heave like they was trying to jump but couldn't budge. Smelly was surprised and confused, but he paid the stranger the $40 as agreed. As the stranger walked away, he again said aloud that he didn't see anything special about the frog. Smelly stood looking at Daniel Webster for a while, wondering what was wrong with him. He noticed the frog did look a little buggy. He picked up the frog and was surprised to find that Daniel Webster felt like he weighed 5 pounds. He then turned the frog upside down, causing Daniel Webster to belch out of all the quail shot inside him. Smelly suddenly understood what had happened and was angry. He went looking for the stranger, but never found him. At this point, Simon Wheeler hears his name called from outside and stops his story about Jim Smelly. He tells the narrator to sit still while he goes outside. He tells the narrator to check why he's wanted. However, the narrator has had enough. The knowing he isn't going to get any information about Reverend Leonard W. Smelly, he starts to leave. As he reaches the door, Wheeler is just on his way back inside. Wheeler immediately starts in again with another story about Jim Smelly, this time about Smelly and one-eyed cow with a stump of tail like a banana. But the narrator, annoyed, interrupts Wheeler to tell him he doesn't want to hear any more about Jim Smiley, and he leaves. So this is the story of the Jumping Frog by Mark Twain, and it tells us how the person, about the habit of a person, how he used to narrate the story of those animals and frogs and cows and horses. And finally, we see that how the people get annoyed and didn't want to listen anymore their story. So I think you will enjoy this, the celebrated jumping frog of Cavalry's County by this Mark Twain. I think it looks very interesting to me, and hope you will enjoy it also. Mark Twain, the celebrated jumping frog. Thank you.